In the name of God, who acts marvelously. Amen. You are just one of many in your area who has heard of this man, Jesus. He's been in your town for a long time. Some say he grew up around there. And you've heard reports that he's been traveling around doing amazing things. According to friends, he's healed a man with leprosy, another with a withered hand. Some friends say he's been throwing out demons. Others say he's even stopped a storm. Still others that he's raised a dead girl to life. And that's not all. On top of it all, your friends tell you he's an amazing teacher. Not only does he tell good stories, but he contradicts a lot of things you've been taught, and you think that's a good thing. So when you hear he's back in town, you decide to go see him for yourself. You're not sure your parents would approve. They'd most likely worry that you'd get lost in the crowd. So there's a little bit of stealth involved, but you know your way around town. You've been running around with your friends for years. You know alleys your parents would never have shown you. And that worry about being back in time for dinner, you've grabbed some food and tucked it away, just in case Jesus talks too long and there aren't any cool things, like raising a dead girl, that would keep you from thinking about your stomach. So you take off, following the stream of people all headed in the same direction, down to a hillside by the seashore. It seems that that's where the action will be. You recognize some of the others who are gathering around him. One of them is someone you know, Andrew, Simon's brother. Those two have often provided the fish that your mom pickles to keep it from going bad, like the fish you brought from home. You told him you had some of those fish in your lunchbox. Gosh, there are a lot of people, but the reports are right. Jesus is an amazing speaker. There's something about him. He has presence. And the things he said are just, as reported, really edgy. No wonder some of the folks in town, including his teacher at the synagogue, are worried about him. He seems to be okay with breaking Sabbath rules. Cool. They're such a pain. And then there's a lull in the action. It's getting late, after all. Jesus gestures to some friends and asks one of them a question. He steps back and looks at Jesus like he's lost his mind. One of the others, you recognize it, it's Andrew, steps away from the group and slips into the crowd. And then you feel a tap on your shoulder. Again, it's Andrew. He asks, "Hey, do you want to meet Jesus? I've got an inside track." You think, this will be worth so much cred at school. And you say, "Well, yeah." And off you go. Andrew tells you, "Stay cool. I just want to introduce you to him. And oh, by the way, I know you have some lunch food. I haven't a clue about this, but don't be surprised. He may want some." Okay, you think. This Jesus guy is all right, given what I've seen. If he wants some smelly fish and ordinary bread, I'll share. Who knew? Jesus grabs your lunchbox and does something amazing. You can only sit back and watch food appear for more than 5,000 people. What a story. And you've been part of it. It is such a powerful story and experience that you told and retold it. So did others who were there. It became one of the stories about Jesus everyone knew. And the story was so significant to the early Christians that all of the Gospels recorded it. In fact, along with the next story of Jesus' walking on water, it is the only story of Jesus' activities in Galilee that all of the Gospels record. The question we have to ask, of course, is why was it so important? What did it tell folks? Was the importance of the story the miracle? I mean, turning a couple of fish and some bread into enough food for 5,000 people stretches credulity. And maybe for some, that was and is enough. Some scholars, on the other hand, point to similarities with the feeding in the wilderness following the Exodus. They point to John's note at the beginning that it was nearly time for Passover, the Jewish festival. And they follow that up with the argument that the walking on water calls to mind the crossing of the Red Sea. And there's that third, fairly popular idea that Jesus's blessing of the boys' fish and bread and the beginning of distribution led to everyone else in the crowd opening their lunch pail. One of the scholars observed the real miracle was that Jesus turned selfish people into sharing people. Whatever John or the other gospel writers had in mind when recording this story will always be the subject of debate. John tells the story a bit differently than the other writers in that he has added the youth to the story. The other evangelists all have the 5 loaves and 2 fish being a part of the disciples' larder. So in John's version, the disciples have nothing in hand. But Andrew knew you, that young person. What you were willing to offer to Jesus was enough for Jesus to make a huge difference. And what is clear to any reader, and what may have been very clear to the disciples around Jesus, as well as you, the young person, is that Jesus can take very little and turn it into a lot. That young person, of course, is us, each of us as individuals and together as a congregation. We have been drawn to Jesus because there's something about him and the promise he represents that's compelling. And for many of us, there may seem to be little in our lunch pail that could feed us, let alone anyone else. Yet as I was reading and praying this story from John, I recalled stories from this congregation. Some of them harken back to a time before I was here. Others are more recent. Some of them include young people. Oh, what we've gained from our youth Sundays. But others speak of the whole congregation. And one that stands out comes from our annual meeting of 2020. We had come through a challenging year. Remember that basement flood? But at that meeting, we were looking forward. We were celebrating a positive stewardship season. We were celebrating a new organ. And towards the end of the meeting, one of the then vestry members stood up and said, "We have everything we need to move forward." The feeding that had taken place in the previous year gave us confidence that Jesus could take what we brought and offered to him and turn it into something amazing, something that would feed the community around us. And then 5 weeks later, COVID shut us down. We had gotten into a boat to travel across the Sea of Galilee to what we could only imagine would be a more wonderful ministry. And then the storm arose. And we strained at the oars, wondering where Jesus was. He'd gone up to the mountain to pray, remember? But as the gospel story tells us, Jesus rejoined the disciples as they were about to get out of that boat. I have to believe that Jesus was praying for his disciples as they struggled against the waves, knowing they could do it, and that he would be there as they landed. Jesus has been working among us in like manner as we've braved the waves of COVID, and now he's among us as we draw near to shore. Dear friends, almost 3 years ago, we embarked together on a journey not knowing precisely where it would end. And here we are, looking together to a future that none of us could have imagined. No one would have imagined 2 basement floods. No one would have imagined a plague. No one would have imagined a beloved organist and his partner departing for the other side of the US. No one would have imagined a fabulous youth director moving on to follow a different career path. And what in the world was Zoom? And why have we grown at least to appreciate it? None of us could have imagined what the future held as we walked with Andrew up to see Jesus with our basket of pickled fish and lowbrow bread. Yet here we are, offering Jesus our meager fare. Indeed, we don't know entirely what our lunch pails may hold, as we're all a bit anxious about what Good Shepherd will look like come the fall, who will return and who will not. But we trust that Jesus will take whatever we have and make it into something amazing. What amazing things will Jesus do with the results, however tentative and temporary, of the revisioning work? We're bringing to Jesus our lunch baskets of fish and bread, all that has fed us in the past, our service schedule, our musical tastes, the way we've educated and enriched ourselves and our children. I wonder what our children might have in their lunch boxes, different from ours. And Jesus will say, I can take all of this and feed you and these 5,000. Well, not everyone will like what I do with pickled fish and barley loaves. Everyone and more can be fed. What in the world will Jesus do to transform what we offer, to transform us well beyond our imagination, to transform our preconceptions, our prejudices, to feed a larger community? We may be satisfied with pickled fish and barley loaves, but Jesus has a greater banquet in mind. There's a miracle, a sign ahead. Speaking of looking ahead, we're already anticipating stewardship season. In actuality, a season that has no beginning and no end. We've had lunch boxes in the past that we believed have defined the extent that we can do. But Jesus looks at the 5,000 and says, I can feed all of these people with more left over with what's in your lunchbox now. The limits of what you believe they hold are nothing compared to who all of your lunch pails together can feed. Your example of offering is just an invitation to others. The story we've heard from John's Gospel is our story, if we let it be. That young person that Andrew knew said yes to the invitation to go up to Jesus. And look what happened then and what can happen now. Amen.